Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a Soka researcher and educator. I hope you find discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Paul Sherman, and I'm really happy to be a part of this Be a Global Citizen podcast. Thank you, Scott, for inviting me. I'm located in cold and snowy Toronto, Canada. It's, well, at when we're filming now, it's cold and snowy because it's in the dead of winter. But and my affiliation with Global Citizenship is I founded the Soka Education Research Centre on Global Citizenship at the University of Guelph-Humber in 2017, which is where I was a professor and chair of the Community Social Services program, and just recently retired from that position just over a year ago. So I'm a free man, except I am continuing to do my research with CIRC-GC is the acronym for Soka Education Research Centre on Global Citizenship, and I'm continuing to work with students as we research various things of global relevancy, and we have a fascinating collaborative online international project with a high school in Osaka, Japan.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Sherman, for being on the podcast. And it's just so amazing to connect with researchers like yourself who have dedicated your career pretty much, right, to this endeavor of really understanding Soka education, also understanding global citizenship, and the ways in which they intersect and build out this deeper understanding of what is it to really lead lives of meaning, right, and creating value through that. And I really appreciate you taking this time, right, even in an early retirement, right, like you said, just recently retiring, but still continuing with your passion to speak on the topic and raise more like young people, young researchers to continue in that work through the research center that you founded. And there's so much that I want to learn about what led you to this particular line of inquiry, what brought you to the particular university that you're working at, that then you were able to create this incredible research center, and then also these international collaborations and partnerships. I think it's so fascinating to have an example like yourself who is anchored in very much a kind of local environment, and yet has such global outreach through exchange programs and research activities. So I wanted to pass it back to you, Dr. Sherman, to share what the milestones have been for you, right? The major influences, maybe even some of the different like pivot points in terms of deciding where to go next, and how that brought you to founding the Soka Education Research Center for Global Citizenship.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to release you from the formalities. You can call me Paul if you
okay,
prefer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul.
I don't mind at all. You mentioned that I've dedicated my entire career to issues around global citizenship and Soka education. That's not quite true. It's actually my second career. And perhaps by way of talking about influences, I can just briefly talk a bit about my first career and how that morphed into my second career. I was actually originally educated and trained as a clinician, diagnosing, assessing, and treating children and adolescents and their families. And that was a very satisfactory career. I had a lot of, I guess I was influenced by my older brother, who was in the throes of becoming a psychologist, and at that time, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do with my life, I guess I decided, okay, I'll go the psychology route as well. Originally, I wanted to be a physical education teacher, but circumstances had it that I couldn't continue in the phys ed program at York University where I was enrolled. I won't go into the long, boring details of that. However, our lives take interesting routes because of circumstances. But I did complete my psychology degree at York University, and I went to U of T to do a postgraduate diploma in child assessment and therapy, and then continued along the journey, getting jobs largely in the nonprofit mental health sector, and working my way up to administrator. I ran a couple of adolescent nonprofit youth counseling clinics. So that career was just over 30 years. But it's anybody in your audience who works in the mental health field or in nonprofit social services knows that you can get burnt out pretty quickly. Satisfying career, but you've got the weight of people's problems on your shoulders. And so I guess around the 30-year mark, I started to think, okay, what do I want to continue doing this until I retire, which would not be for another 15, 20 years, or is there something else I'd rather do to contribute value to the world? And I again, circumstances led me to Japan, where I was fortunate to attend the honorary degree ceremony at Laval University. Laval University is in Quebec. It was the first honorary degree that was bestowed on Daisaku Ikeda from a Canadian university, and I was, being a member of the Soka International Canada, I was asked to be a representative. And I was just blown away by President Ikeda's speech. He talked quite a lot about education and how it's probably the most important undertaking in anybody's life. And I thought, that might be a good thing to get into. I said naively. At that time, I did not have a PhD, so it would have been difficult for me to get into the higher education sector. But I did. It was only a short 4 or 5 months after that I was able to land the job at the University of Guelph-Humber as the program head of a couple of programs. And from there, my life just opened up in terms of learning about higher education, but also expanding my understanding and research into Soka education and global citizenship. And so many incredible things happened just in that very short period of time, from 2010 until 2024 when I retired. So my career basically has two sections, two chapters to it, and they're both related for sure. Because when you're working with people who are experiencing life problems, your job as a clinician is to enable them, empower them, to give them the tools to overcome their problems, to deal with their problems. And that very much is part of what Soka Education is about, is to empower students. And it's also very much what global citizenship is about. It's to empower citizens, ordinary individuals, to think of their place in the world and how they might make the world a better place. So anyway, that's maybe a bit long, but that's kind of answers, I think, your question a little bit.
It did, most definitely. And thank you so much for sharing about both of these very worthwhile and meaningful careers of yours. It's yeah, I guess in our initial interactions when we connected, I might have assumed I was like, oh, you're just the global citizenship expert. But then learning more about this background of yours in psychology as a clinician, and the many years that you put into supporting children and adolescents, I think you said,
Yeah.
like yeah, that being the population, it's fascinating, and I think there's nothing wasted, of course, right, with kind of the skills and the foundation that you built out, and then kind of applying that into your work as a professor, administrator, right, building out a new research center, and yeah, and there's so much about that you said this expansion over a relatively short period of time, right, in the second career that I'm really fascinated to learn more about. I did want to kind of look a little bit closer at the this influence of yours to becoming a psychologist. You said that your older brother was already, you know, a psychologist, and you figured, okay, well, maybe that seems like a pathway that I can do. It sounds that you probably trusted in your older brother, had a fairly high opinion of him to think, okay, he made a good decision, so maybe I'll do that. Could you speak a little bit about just what that relationship was like with that particular brother? Because it sounds like is meaningful to get you onto that pathway.
Yeah, sure. Um, well, he's one of seven brothers. There's eight of us actually, um, and no sisters. And of course, growing up, we were always the talk of the town. Having such a large family, growing up in the 50s and 60s, um, and so um, it's interesting. When I was in my last year of high school, I don't know if they do that anymore at high school. In high school, but I took an aptitude test that basically was supposed to indicate where your potential was, or where your career should be. And I was really disappointed because it strongly came out and said that my best bet would be to train to become a bricklayer. And at that point, as I mentioned, I wanted to be a phys ed teacher. I was really into sports a lot, as were all of my brothers. And I mean, the joke was that we could have our own hockey team or baseball team, a short one for a baseball team, but at any rate. So the prospect of becoming a bricklayer was really disappointed, and but I could have, because I like working outdoors, and I've worked in landscape and building pools and stuff like that. But I somehow didn't see that as a trajectory for my life. But I had no other idea of what I wanted to do. And yes, I looked up a lot, as we all did. The firstborn, the brother. Um, all families are different, but coming from a Jewish family, he was treated as special, and of course, we all saw him that way. Um, and yeah, I figured, okay, if I'm going to do something, why not do something that my older brother, who I respect, has gotten into? And I think I had some interest in behavior, relationships. You can't help but having an interest in that when you come from a large family, because so much goes on in the dynamics of large families. Um, so you can't help but want to study that and be an observer of that sort of a thing. But as I mentioned, I was more interested in the sports side of things. So I did enroll in the kinesiology program. It wasn't called kinesiology back then. It was called physical education, and minoring in psychology. But when circumstances didn't allow me to continue, basically I couldn't swim, couldn't pass the swim test. And I didn't like the anatomy labs. I didn't like dissecting rhesus monkeys, so I skipped those. And then I got a very bad mark in that class, and I had to go to summer school if I wanted to continue in phys ed, and I didn't have I had to work in summer to make my tuition, and so I just changed my minor in psychology to a major. I was quite happy to do that sort of thing. But yeah, my older brother, who's the psychologist, is actually a pioneer in the field of autism. Um, he worked a lot in the 70s, researching and um, developing intervention programs, treating autistic children in the home. At that point, it was very rare for an autistic child um, to be away from an institution, and so he was one of the first to develop programs that allowed autistic children to stay at home and have one-to-one education uh, in home environment. So yeah, so that's. I don't think we want to get into all the history of all of my brothers, but yes,
It's a
he
lot
was
of
very.
brothers.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you for sharing more about your older brother, and also just giving us more understanding of, yeah, your upbringing. It sounded like it was quite lively, and definitely, yeah. You said the talk of the town, like 8 brothers. Wow, or there's 8 of you, and it's really fascinating, right? Because to make things like, as I mean, I would imagine, right? The Your parents probably wanted there to be some semblance of like harmony, or like at least calm
Mhm.
throughout. So being able to make those observations and kind of pick up on certain cues and learn from one another. I think that definitely trains you in a way that maybe an aptitude test can't quite pick up on, at
Oh,
least in those early phases.
right.
And yeah, what a shocking result, bricklayer. I would imagine, the aptitude tests have probably changed quite a bit in terms of what jobs they put out there. But it just the way
Right.
that you shared it was very humorous, and you were clearly not too enthusiastic about that. But I will say though that in the spirit of like really giving that aptitude test some credit, I feel like the kind of foundational aspect of laying bricks and
Yeah.
having them be very solid and set in the realm of like education and the work that you're doing, in a way, you are kind of like a bricklayer
Yeah.
because
Good metaphor. I like that. That's true. So that aptitude test was not totally incorrect. Uh, I just know that um, the reality is that there's no way I would have survived as a bricklayer in the cold of Toronto. And I spent 10 years in Montreal, which is even colder. So I think I made a good choice there not to, although the way that AI is going and what they're talking about in terms of AI taking away certain jobs, I don't think AI can replace bricklayers. So that
Mm,
job is probably safe. But
yeah, yeah,
anyway,
you need
I'm
someone out
happy with
there
the
to do it.
career choices that I did make.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm happy that I could help with a little reframe as
Yeah,
far as
yeah.
the aptitude
I'll
test.
use that. I like that. That's good. That'll add to my story when I talk about that.
Definitely. And now I think this gets us to more of like the first career and your work as a psychologist. You did mention that it's quite common, those who work in the field of mental health, to get burnt out because of the demands that are put on those professionals from their clients, as far as the kind of heaviness of the trauma that they're grappling with, and the ways in which they're trying to overcome that, right? To kind of get to a different stage, and have certain clarity, or certain like new tools to then like push forward and advance. And I feel that the topic of burnout is very relevant for any field, honestly. Nowadays, definitely for educators. Like, I could speak for myself,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to hear from you. What was it like that allowed you to continue on in the work, and not have burnout necessarily kind of like have you take a detour, earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think for me, moving into managerial and then senior administrative jobs probably was my way of removing myself from the day-to-day burnout aspect. So no longer was I listening to really traumatic and sad stories um, from people with multiple issues that are basically heartbreaking, and trying to find some way to encourage them to change, um, with some level of success with some, but then no success with others. And it's hard on the human psyche, because most people get into the field of mental health because they all do because they want to help, but some get into it naively at the beginning because they think that they can just solve everybody's problems. And then they quickly learn that's not the case. Um, and then, not to mention that for the longest time, because it's a nonprofit, financial compensation is terrible for people working in that field. So you're listening to really harrowing stories and with some kind of success, but you're not being compensated as well as you think you should, and being told, well, you shouldn't be because you're just doing good. So you should be happy with the fact that you're doing good rather than worry about your salary, um, which is BS, to tell you the truth. And I think salaries are catching up now, but still, it's a nonprofit world. It's, nonprofit means that the company you're working for is not making a profit. You're basically getting funding from governments or grants, or United Way, to run the programs and to pay the staff at minimal wages. So that all feeds in to the burnout. And I think my response to all of that was, in addition to the fact that I thought I had skills in leadership that I could, rather than simply do the frontline work, that I could be more helpful and instrumental in directing programs, coming up innovative programs, and leading staff in humanistic ways to treat our clients. So, but there are some people who stick it out on the front lines for decades and decades. They love the work, despite the fact that it is tough to do. And that's, everybody's different in how they respond to that sort of thing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, every job has its stresses. Um, Dealing with people's problems day in, day out is one of the higher stressors that you can deal with, because you got your own problems too. And then you've got, depending on what decade you're living in, certainly the current decade, you've got all these macro issues that you're worried about, especially if you're young. I don't know if you caught the doomsday clock announcement yesterday, but now we're the closest to this metaphorical end of the world that we've ever been. We're 85 seconds to midnight. If you or your audience are not aware of the doomsday clock, just check it out. Just Google doomsday clock, and it's from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists that was developed by Oppenheimer and Einstein in Chicago in 2 years after the war. They realized that nuclear weaponry is not necessarily a good thing, and they wanted to put their efforts towards more benevolent efforts. So anyway, I would suggest checking that. But I raised that because we are in very, very turbulent times, more so than we've probably ever been, with respect to threats of nuclear war and AI technology and environmental issues, of course. So these are all things that, hover over people's heads as they're doing their jobs. And I think for people working in the mental health field, who are helping people by nature of the work, it causes even more strain for them because they're working 9 to 5 or whatever their shift is, and all they're dealing with their problems. And then when they're in their free time, then they've got all these other problems to think about, not to mention their own personal problems. So yeah, it's a tough field, and I marvel at the people who want to continue to work in that field. They obviously they have their own influences and background stories as to why they want to get into the helping profession, and it's good that they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing more about that, Paul. And I find that in being really honest with the work that you're doing is so valuable to then inform what the next decision is, whether to stay, whether to leave, right, to go into a different working capacity. And then from that recognition or that honesty, then comes wisdom in terms of like, well, what is a better fit, or what are you kind of like mapping out for yourself, and then in your case, right, taking on more administrative roles, leadership roles that allowed you to really continue to make impact in the area without necessarily kind of really I don't want to use say jeopardize, right? But without necessarily feeling the same heaviness as being on the front lines, because I think that everyone is different; they come in different contexts. But you continue to still feel that the external pressures of like what's happening in the world, and what are even like things within your own family and like social bubbles is going on. So there's no getting around all of that, and it is I do feel those pressures as a teacher, and I think more so the times that we're living where it's a 24-hour news cycle. It's just relentless, and we hear about a lot of things that maybe are breaking news that are not very important, and then something like what you just mentioned about the doomsday clock, something very, very important that everyone should know about, but it's not really breaking news across the media landscape that we would hope and what it should deserve. And so from burnout to then talking about the doomsday clock, there's a lot of kind of sense of maybe doom and gloom as far as what the future holds. But I want to now take us to that moment in Japan that you talked about when Daisaku Ikeda, he was receiving his honorary doctorate, and you spoke about the speech really moving you and prompting you to take a pretty dramatic action to go into a new career. And I feel there's something about that speech that probably sparked hope about what more you can do in the remainder of your working career. So could you maybe speak to what about that speech really moved you, and then also just that built this momentum to kind of carry you up until now, and even beyond. But yeah, could you take us to that moment, because it sounds like it was very, very pivotal.
Yeah, from what I remember of the speech, this is going on. What do we know? This is going on 15 years, of course. Um, Ikeda is inspirational, basically, with anything that he says. So, you just have to pick up one of his numerous uh, dialogues, or the human revolution or the moving revolution, or in anything. And you don't have to be, a practitioner in the Soka Gakkai to be inspired by what he says. And by example, I'm going to get back to your question, but by example, all the students that I've worked with at the University of Guelph-Humber, whether I've taken them on study abroad to Japan through my course, which is an introduction to Soka Education, or my research students, and we study Ikeda and Todo Nakaguchi for that fact. They are, and they've never heard of the Soka Gakkai, much less Ikeda. They are just totally blown away when they read So for the past few years, along with the collaborative online work that we're doing with Kansai Soka High School students, I have a reading group with my research assistants. And so every 2 weeks we'll meet and we're reading from the book, The Light of Learning, or Ikeda's University Addresses. And these are essays that, I mean, the students, I feel badly. I don't give them enough time to discuss the content, but they read them and they take turns facilitating discussion. And they're all very inspiring. And but this particular speech, I mean, I was at a pivotal point in my life where I was feeling that, I've done the mental health thing. I think I've done all I can. I still have some years left in my working life. Um, I don't want to be a bricklayer. That's already been established. Too old to be a professional athlete. So that window closed. And I do remember he talked a lot about um, education is the most powerful thing that can change a person's mind and hence their behavior. And of course, if a person changes, then their environment changes, and then we have this ripple effect. But it all starts with education. And I don't think he was just strictly talking about formal education. It could be education in the home. It could be, learning how to play the guitar from a teacher or a mentor. But education in the sense of acquiring new knowledge, using that knowledge to develop your wisdom to become a better person. That's, to me, that was the formula. And I at that point I had already been in the Soka Gakkai for a good um, 25 years, and so I had heard these things before. But for some reason, you can hear things over and over again, and nothing twigs, and then somehow the circumstances are right. You're in the right frame of mind that you have this, what they call this, an aha moment, and uh, just hearing him say, yeah, I guess I was at the right moment to hear that sort of thing. And I thought, okay, I think if I'm going to make, um, a dent, in the world, um, more of a dent than I already have, I'm going to switch into education. Now, I had already taught part-time at college, as I was working full-time, just to sort of dabble in that. And so I liked the idea of teaching. Um, And so it was, for me, it was really a no-brainer. All the cards were there, everything added up, and um, it wasn't going to be easy because of my circumstances. Um, but I just decided I would go for it. And to tell you the truth, looking back, it was easy. As I said, it took me from that May 10th meeting when I first heard that speech and made up my mind I was going to become an educator, to getting the job, which at the university, which was basically 4 months. That's a pretty short period of time, and the circumstances just all fell into place. And um, we talk about um, in in um, in Buddhism or in the Soka Gakkai, we talk about mission, which is basically what's your purpose? What do you want to do while you during your time on Earth to make a difference? And I found that getting this job at university helped me to realize my mission. Yeah, I was happy with the work I was doing in mental health, um, but I never got the sense that I was making a real difference. Even though there's some of the families and teenagers that I had helped. Uh, you know, that's great. But I never got the sense I was making a difference, like in a global a broader way. And I thought education would be the vehicle for that. And it has been, because, I've been able to establish a platform where Soka education, this humanistic philosophy, is not well known in North America. Much more so, much more in the States and in Canada. And I've been able to create a vehicle where, through research and teaching, where I can let more people, students, and educators and administrators know about this philosophy, so that they too can have an understanding of what this very unique humanistic philosophy of life can contribute to the world. And so all the various things that I've been able to do in the 15-year period, to me, I think I've done more in terms of contributing to improving society in those 15 years than I did in the previous 50 years of my life before that.
Thank you for sharing, Paul. But also in Buddhism, nothing is ever wasted, and everything happens for a reason. And to get to that point of determination to become an educator, become a professor, and then make that kind of like impact on a global scale, I think the training that you had was so invaluable before that. And yeah, and like you said, you had no regrets, and it was still really joyful and important work. But yeah, it's just so it's so the word I think for me is hope, inspiring, and like it's reassuring for me as someone who is still very much in like my first career and figuring out a lot of things, and knowing that um, in a way, like through your example of what you shared, it kind of gets better. It's like compounding, right? In a way, like the skills that you have, and like the momentum with which you then continue to pursue that purpose, that mission that you have, you're able to really like leverage everything. And then when you were talking about that kind of moment of decision, like after listening to Ikeda's speech, and then just a couple months later, then landing a job at the university. I mean, that's just like, again, like everything fell into place, but like, wow, that's so profound. And yeah, it was definitely meant to be. And I think for me now, like looking at your pathway, um, I'm curious because you kind of already created this thread, or not, maybe not a thread, more of a bridge. You created this bridge between your first career and your second career, and you talked about how it was basically empowering individuals, and then so now in the second part of your career, empowering global citizens. Was it through Ikeda's speech and the many writings that you've looked at and studied? Is that where like the focus on global citizen came from? And so yeah, so could you maybe speak a little bit more about that focus, because clearly it then built into the actual research institute. So would love to hear more about like how global citizenship became the main focus of your research.
Sure. Well, yeah, largely it was Ikeda's influence for sure. I mean, I don't think I had heard that term um, for the greater part of my life, except perhaps in the 70s when I took an electives course at U of T on environmental studies, and the professor was an advocate. He was talking about climate change at that time, although he wasn't calling it climate change. I think they talk about pollution and stuff, the ozone layer, and that really opened my eyes, because I'd not heard about that stuff before, probably because I didn't care. When I was in my 20s, I didn't care about that stuff. Pollution. Okay, so fine, that's like decades in the future, or am I going to be alive? The kind of thing that unfortunately pervades a lot of thinking. Like bury your head in the sand. It's in the future. Well, the future is here now. But anyway, that's probably where if I did hear about global citizenship in my past, that's probably where I did, but it didn't register. So truly, I first heard about global citizenship from Ikeda's speech at Columbia on education for global citizenship in 1996. So we have coming up, I think he made that speech in June. So coming up to the 30th anniversary of him. And um, I, that speech really struck me. Just the way that he framed characteristics of global citizenship in a very Buddhistic, um, but approachable or accessible manner. So he talked about wisdom, courage, and compassion. Um, and linking that to the characteristics of bodhisattvas, but talking about it in terms of global citizenship terms. And then he talked about education, the kind of curriculum that all schools should have with respect to global citizenship. So that 1996 was really the turning point for me to, for that term to sink into my head. Now it would still take me a good 15 years before I was able to do anything about it because there's not much, working in mental health, there's not much of a relationship. It wasn't back then. It could be now. You can draw a link with that, but certainly not back then. So it registered, but I never forgot that speech, and it's a very, very famous and significant speech, certainly for um, all students of Soka education and teachers. When I've done my research interviewing um, students in the Soka schools, and I asked them, you talk about influence. One of my research questions was, what has influenced you the most uh, in terms of, to think about global citizenship? Every single one of them said Ikeda's speech. So on from Columbia University, every one of them. So they all study it, and well, they should. And my students here in Toronto study it as well. Um, and it just makes sense. So it's very influential. Um, so that was the biggest. Ikeda's understanding of global citizenship was, um, to me, the biggest influence. Certainly, when I got into the higher education environment and I was able to do something about it at my university, University of Guelph-Humber, there was nothing going on with respect to global citizenship. Nothing. Um, and so I made it my purpose to try and bring this idea to the university, uh, even to the point where I had arranged, got the approval from the vice provost to take a contingent to on a week-long training course in Potsdam, Germany, on global citizenship. And I had convinced the vice provost that perhaps we should we should be introducing this idea across the university in the courses in student life. Uh, uh, you know, not 100%, but we pick our spots, give students an opportunity to learn about it. And so I think about 6 or 7 of us went, and it got mixed reviews from my colleagues. Uh, and there was the typical stuff, like, uh, yeah, it's interesting, but who wants a one world kind of situation? A lot of the negative mythology about it. So it never stuck, actually. But I wasn't going to give up, and so I developed these courses on global citizenship. So for my part, I was able to introduce students and faculty um, to the work that I was doing, and then I was fortunate to receive grant, long-standing funding to develop this research center, where the purpose of that was to conduct research on Soka education and global citizenship, sometimes just Soka education, sometimes just global citizenship, but other times combine the two, because they're the philosophy of Soka education and the idea of global citizenship education are really highly aligned. They share some of the same values. And so this research center has allowed me to keep that idea in top of mind at the university. Because whenever we publish something or our students go to an event and present the research, it's announced as news at the university, and more people hear about it. So that's from that one little seed of Ikeda's speech at Columbia, kind of sprouted this idea that I had that I felt I wanted to make more of a dent in terms of my contribution to this world on a macro level, as opposed to the micro. Micro was when I was a clinician, changing one life at a time. Macro is trying to influence a large section of society, and that's what global citizenship is to think of your environment, your interactions with the environment, just not the family or your local community or even your country, but to think of humanity as a whole. How am I going to relate to people who I don't even know? And one of the things, I just go back to when I'm thinking I first heard about global citizenship through that university course. I'm pretty sure the professor, ironically enough, his name was Dr. Chant. And I thought, and it would be years later that I would be introduced to Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, the chanting of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I thought that was so pretty ironic. But anyway, I'm pretty sure he talked about the butterfly effect, which is instrumental in both Buddhism in terms of dependent origination and interconnection. That is, that idea of that all life is interconnected is not just something that Ikeda has written about, but we did, one of our research projects was a meta-analysis of 30 contemporary scholarly studies on global citizenship, and we looked at the words that were used to describe global citizenship and see if there was any commonalities. The number one word in all 30 studies was this word interconnection. So global citizenship is synonymous with interconnection, that we're all connected in some way to one another. Most people don't think that way. Most people think, okay, they go as far as maybe their neighborhood. I'm connected to my neighborhood or to my community, whatever their community is. Certainly their family. Most people don't think about how they're connected to someone, halfway around the world or all the way around the world. And that keeps them, unfortunately, from developing an empathy towards strangers that they're not familiar with. Because if you don't feel connected to them, then why should you care about them? But if you do feel connected in some way, then yeah, you're going to have some level of compassion or empathy for them, and maybe take action that's going to, help out people that you don't even know. So that to me is one of the great values of global citizenship education, is for young people to learn to think outside of their own needs. I don't mean to say to not think about their need, but I mean to say to think outside, meaning that they can think about their needs as well as other people's needs. So, and I don't want to be mistaken to say that only global citizens think about other people's needs. There's a lot of people walking around this earth that don't identify as global citizens that are very compassionate. But I think the idea of global citizenship uh, carries a common understanding that um, it's okay to care about other people. You know, I know um, this idea of anti-woke hasn't made its imprint in Canada as much as it has the States. You guys have gone nuts there with this anti-woke stuff, but um, so much so that wokeness sounds like a disease. But uh, woke is just being a global citizen. And maybe that's why there's so much anti-woke um, with the current administration, because it is thinking about outside of your own boundary. It is thinking about outside of your nationalistic um, hopes and dreams. It is thinking about the world as uh, getting along, living harmoniously, and that's kind of dangerous to authoritarian rule. But we won't get into politics. I promised myself I wouldn't do that because
No,
you guys are an easy mark.
no, thank you so much, Paul. There's so much that you shared as far as like from the seed to then the sapling to what you've constructed and built, not just in terms of the research center itself, focusing on Soka education and global citizenship. I would say it's more of this ethos that's pervading the center that's really seeking to make a mark, a deeper mark. You said dent, but I think that it has very much the potential to transform the university over time, and that people take notice when concrete results are shown. And from what I've learned through your students, you've been able to successfully co-author and publish many different scholarly articles. You've been able to show successful and by successful, I guess I mean really joyful and meaningful international exchange programs, and been able to create just so much value for these young people, these undergraduates at the university, and none of that's going unnoticed, right? So I think that it's really important. And then you focusing on the word interconnectedness by looking at the research and seeing what it shows as like this kind of recurring word that we can really kind of closely approximate to like what global citizenship is all about. I mean, there's so much, but I think it helps us to really center our thoughts on like what does it mean to be connected to others? What does it mean to care for others? And also in terms of the political climate that we are living in, yeah, it would seem that just simply talking about global citizenship is in a way revolutionary because it bucks the kind of political agenda that would say very much we should watch out for others, right? We should kind of have this disdain and then put up more barriers, and that leads to this polarizing effect that is resulting in violence and misery.
Yeah.
And it's not good in my opinion. And I'm just so happy that we could be able to feature your story and also bring up some of these important findings from your research and through your students about global citizenship. And I just really appreciate you for being here and sharing this. And I wanted to I will ask one more question, and that is a book or movie recommendation. So anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, there's so many books. You know, I recently read Annie Jacobson's book, Nuclear War Scenario. As frightening as it is, I think everybody should read it. So that's one. But I would, I mean, I have so many, but speaking of Ikeda, this is, I don't know if you can see it. It's called For the Sake of Peace. It's just 7 Paths to Global Harmony, a Buddhist perspective. And for anybody who's not interested in Buddhism or are worried about uh, that this might lean too heavily on Buddhism. It doesn't. Of course, he mentions it because his thoughts are based on Buddhism, but it's really about what we need to do to secure a lasting and harmonious peace. And I'm just reading it now, and it just strikes me. And this was written 20 years ago, but it strikes me how relevant it is now because he talks about ultranationalism and authoritarianism and how divisive these things can be, and it's just an amazing, his amazing insights that he has, and these are insights that I don't think they necessarily just came out from the. I mean, he's obviously came from his own brain, but he's had so many dialogues with um, people from all around the world, like historians and scientists and authors and politicians, and he's able to gain their perspective and develop his own perspective on what we need to do to secure a lasting future. And so I would really recommend that for the sake of peace by Tatsuya Ikeda.
Great. Thank you so much. And I have not read that book. I've read a lot of things by Ikeda, but
Yeah.
now my interest is very much piqued, and I want to look at that. And you also had that other book recommendation too, right? The one about
Annie
nuclear.
Jacobson. Yeah.
Annie Jacobson.
That's recent. Annie Jacobson, American author. Um, I think it's the subtitle is it's Nuclear War: A Scenario,
Mhm.
and it's based on research that she's done. It's not fiction. Well, I wouldn't say it's fiction because she's interviewed high level people in the United States and around the world, and she's pieced together what would happen in the event of basically a mistake, somebody misreading, somebody's launching of a nuclear weapon, and then I mean that's happened before. She recounts an incident that happened, I think it was in the 80s, where Russia had detected what they thought was a nuclear weapon coming at them from the States. And the person, the technician who detected it, just thought this can't be happening. So he wasn't trigger happy, and it could have gone very very bad if they had reacted the wrong way. But they reacted the right way. They checked it out and this and that. But this is why it's so important. I mean, people have their own opinions about the value of nuclear weapons as deterrents, um, but I'm not sure that value overrides the possibility of all we need is one trigger happy maniac who has nuclear weapons to just blow it all. And so I'm on the camp of doing away with all nuclear weapons. And my students, this is one of the things I'm quite proud about is we don't get a lot of students don't get a lot of education about the nuclear issue in Canada because we've been protected, as Trump likes to say lately. We've been protected by the states for so long. It hasn't really been an issue for us, so we don't study it. So when my students start to look into nuclear weapons, they really get into it. They really see. Some of them have the idea. Yeah, it's good to have. It's good as a deterrence. But then they change their mind when they see the potential destruction. Well, not potential. We know about the destruction already that it's caused. So anyway, that book by Annie Jacobson, I think, is really it's scary, but it's scary good. And I'm
Mm.
sure once Hollywood gets its hands on a script, there'll be a movie within a couple of years.
It'll reach the masses. That's what we need. Wow. Well, lots of different recommendations, and I appreciate you sharing more about just the seriousness of nuclear weapons and just the where we're at right now is something that can't go unnoticed any longer. And so that's another book that I'm going to be looking into. That's
If
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for those recommendations, and again for the wonderful conversation.
Mhm.
Again, appreciate you for taking this time. And the only thing left is to pass it over to you for any final thoughts or any final words as we wrap up this conversation.
Well, I enjoyed this. You can tell you enjoy a conversation when it goes by very quickly. And I guess most people like talking about themselves anyway. You give us the opportunity to do that. So I want to thank you, Scott. I know that you graduated from SUA, Soka University America, and I've been there a number of times. Fantastic university, um, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. You know, global citizenship, not unlike Soka Education, is only beginning to pick up steam. I mean, global citizenship has made its way through higher education, kind of like a roller coaster. Um, I think, unfortunately, it's on a down slide now because it's hard to study global citizenship in when the education system is. And again, I sort of pick on the states, but when you're doing away with free thinking and that sort of thing, and we're thinking about the other. But it'll make its comeback in the States. You've got too many universities that are doing phenomenal work around global citizenship. For example, Soka University America, and there are some universities in Florida that almost have their entire curriculum based on global citizenship. And I think that's really, in my research, that's what I recommend is you have to take a holistic approach to global citizenship education. It's nice to offer an electives course here, an electives course there, but the entire college or university milieu has to be on board with that idea, so that students um, are grasping this idea of global citizenship in on many different platforms, everything from a course to going to the cafeteria and there's foods of the world down there. Anything that gives students a different perspective on life, as opposed to just being cocooned where they are. So I'll end with that, and thanks again for inviting me, and good luck with your podcast. You're doing a great job.